You just flopped a set. Full house. The absolute nuts. And your first instinct, the one that fires automatically, the one poker training has drilled into you for years, is to bet. Build the pot. Get the money in. Don't let them get there for free. But here's what nobody is telling you. That instinct is costing you double-ups. It's costing you the stack-building moments that separate a deep run from an early exit. Because in MTTs, the situation always determines the play. And there are 5 specific situations where putting down the betting lead and letting your opponent drive the action will generate significantly more chips than anything else you could do with those same cards. This isn't about being passive. It's not about being tricky for the sake of it. It's about reading the mechanical reality of the hand, the stack-to-pot ratio, the opponent's range, the board texture, the tournament stage, and recognizing the moments where checking, calling, and letting them fire is mathematically superior to leading. Most tournament players fast play everything because it feels safe. Get the money in good, right? But here's the part nobody talks about in training videos or strategy articles. When you fast play into an opponent whose range is polarized and aggressive, you're actually giving them information while simultaneously limiting the pot size you can build. You're letting them make an easy decision. Slow playing, done correctly at the right moment, is not weakness. It's a trap. It's pressure disguised as passivity. It's a weapon that the best tournament players in the world deploy in precise, calculated situations, and one that most of the field never learns to use effectively. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear, specific framework for recognizing these 5 spots in real time and executing them correctly. Let's build your stack the right way. Here's what makes these 5 situations different from general slow play advice. They're not based on feel or player reads. They're grounded in solver data, stack-to-pot mechanics, and tournament-specific dynamics that create measurable edges when executed correctly. Most tournament players never learn to use this weapon because nobody breaks down the exact conditions that make it work. Today, that changes for you. The 5 situations in this video are the specific, recurring spots where the math and the mechanics align in favor of patience, and understanding all 5 will permanently change how you build stacks in tournaments. Before we get into the 5 situations, we need to establish the single mechanical principle that makes slow playing work in tournaments, because without understanding this, the 5 spots won't make sense, and you'll misapply them at exactly the wrong moments. That principle is SPR, stack-to-pot ratio. SPR is the relationship between the effective stack and the current pot size. It answers one question: how much work is left to do to get all the money in? High SPR means deep stacks relative to the pot. There's a lot of poker left to play, multiple streets to navigate, and many ways for the hand to go sideways before you get the chips you want. Low SPR means shallow stacks relative to the pot. The money is going in naturally within 1 or 2 more actions regardless of what either player does. Here's why this matters for slow playing specifically. When you have a monster hand and the SPR is low, fast playing makes sense because you're simply locking in the commitment. The money is getting in either way, and there's no additional value to be extracted through deception. But when the SPR is genuinely high, and your opponent's range contains strong hands that will continue building the pot for you, the right move is often to let them do all the heavy lifting. You check. They bet. You call. They fire the turn. They fire the river. And by the end, significantly more money is in the middle than if you had raised immediately and compressed their range. GTO Wizard's solver data confirms this pattern clearly across multiple spots. When facing large bet sizes with nutted hands, calling is frequently the dominant response, not raising. The villain's large bet is doing the work for you. Your job is to stay out of the way and let it happen. Here's the thing about SPR that most intermediate tournament players never fully internalize. It doesn't just tell you how much work is left to do. It tells you who should be doing the work. When SPR is high and your opponent has a range that will continue applying pressure across multiple streets, the correct answer is almost always to let them do it. You stay in control by appearing to have none. That tension between what your hand actually is and what your opponent thinks it might be is the entire foundation of profitable slow playing. Without understanding SPR, you're just guessing at when to trap. With it, you have a mechanical framework that tells you when patience is mathematically superior to aggression. Every one of the 5 situations we're about to cover is rooted in this principle. The SPR determines the play, not the hand strength alone. Your hand could be the nuts, and fast playing can still be a mistake if the SPR mechanics favor patience. Internalize this first, and the 5 situations become obvious extensions of the same logic. Situation 1, when your opponent is using a large bet size. This is the most counterintuitive spot for most players, and also the most important one to internalize. When the villain bets big, 70% of the pot or more, most players with monster hands immediately reach for the raise. The thinking is, they have something, I have the nuts, get it in. But here's where it gets interesting and expensive if you misread it. When your opponent uses a large bet size, they are communicating something very specific about their range. Large bets in poker represent polarity. The bettor either has a very strong hand or is running a significant bluff. Very little middle ground. And a polarized betting range has a critical characteristic. It expects continued aggression and plans for it. The player who bets 80% pot on the flop has already committed mentally to firing future streets. They have put themselves in continuation mode. Left unchallenged, they are going to bet again on the turn, and again on the river. This is exactly where slow playing generates its largest payoff. When you raise immediately, you interrupt that continuation sequence entirely. You hand them an easy decision. Fold marginal hands, shove the best ones, and you lose the action from everything in between. When you call instead, you keep every hand in their range alive and betting. You keep the bluffs alive. You keep the second best made hands alive. You keep the draws alive. GTO Wizard data confirms this precisely. Facing large flop C bets with nutted hands out of position, calling is the solver's preferred response the majority of the time. The villain's aggression is your asset. The bigger the bet they make, the more you want to let it continue. Learning to do nothing with the best hand at the table is one of the most valuable skills in tournament poker. Here's something that makes this situation even more powerful in practice. When you check call a large flop bet with the nuts and the villain fires the turn, they have now invested significant chips across 2 streets with you showing nothing but passivity. Their mental model of your hand has shifted toward weakness. By the river, many opponents who started with strong hands are now committed to either value betting or bluffing off most of their remaining stack, because they've seen 2 streets of apparent weakness from you and concluded they're ahead or that pressure will work. At that point, your check raise or call on the river extracts everything. The large bet slow play isn't just about keeping them betting. It's about manipulating their read of your hand for 3 full streets so that their confidence level stays high enough to commit maximum chips. That's a much more valuable outcome than the quick raise-fold sequence you'd have gotten by fast playing. Situation 2. Dry boards where the opponent's range has few draws to pick up equity. This is one of the cleanest and most reliable slow play spots in all of tournament poker, and one that intermediate players consistently fail to exploit fully. Here's the setup. You flop a monster, set, 2 pair, full house, on a dry, disconnected board. Something like K7-2 rainbow or 9-4-2 with no flush draw possible. Nothing connects, no straight draws worth fearing, no flush draws at all. No way for your opponent to meaningfully improve on the turn or river with hands that weren't already strong on the flop. Your first instinct might be to check because there's nothing to protect against. That instinct is partially correct, but the real reason to check is far more profitable than just protection. On a dry board, your opponent's range changes very little from street to street. K7-2 rainbow looks almost identical on the turn and river no matter what card comes. The player who had second pair on the flop still has second pair on the river. The player who had top still has top pair with the same confidence they had when they first bet it. Nothing has visually threatened them. And here is where the money is. Because the board looks safe and unchanged, players with made hands feel comfortable continuing to bet. They're not worried about draws completing. They're not worried about board dynamics shifting. The same read that made them bet the flop will make them bet the turn. And the river. They feel secure. They feel like they're ahead. And they fire directly into your monster for 3 streets, building an enormous pot, while you do nothing but call and keep them comfortable. The dry board slow play is one of the highest EV plays in tournament poker, precisely because it extracts 3 full streets of value from players who feel in control the entire time. Here's the psychological layer that makes the dry board slow play even more profitable at the intermediate stakes where most MTT players compete. When the board is dry, and unchanged looking. Opponents who are betting into you are betting with confidence. They believe their hand is ahead, or that they can get you to fold. That confidence is your ally. Confident bettors bet bigger. They fire more streets. They don't back off because nothing on the board is threatening their read. Meanwhile, you're sitting with the nuts, watching their stack migrate toward the middle of the table one bet at a time, offering nothing but a passive call that reinforces their confidence. By the river, you've built a pot that would have been impossible to build through fast playing, because every fast play raise along the way would have caused them to reassess and potentially get away. The dry board removes the dynamic pressure that usually causes opponents to slow down, and that is exactly the mechanical condition that makes multi-street slow play most profitable. Situation 3. Deep stacks and genuinely high SPR. This is the most technically demanding situation of the 5, and it's also the one that creates the single largest pots in tournament poker when executed correctly. When effective stacks are 80, 100 or more big blinds deep, which happens at the beginning of large field events, during late registration periods, or when two big stacks happen to collide at the same table, the SPR is high enough that a single raise on the flop simply won't get the money in. There are multiple streets to navigate, and in those multi-street situations, the question isn't just whether to raise, it's whether raising now is a better outcome than raising later, after the pot has grown naturally and your opponent is pot committed. Here's the core insight that changes how you think about this. When you raise the flop with the nuts in a genuine deep stack spot, you build the pot immediately, but you also clarify your range dramatically. You've announced significant strength, and against any thinking opponent, that announcement compresses their range. Hands that would have called multiple streets and built the pot voluntarily now fold to the early raise, or they re-raise and create a binary decision far earlier than the situation requires. When you check-call the flop instead, you achieve two things simultaneously. First, you keep every hand in their range alive and betting naturally over 3 streets. Second, you keep your own range completely disguised. From their perspective, you could have a draw, a medium-made hand, a speculative trap, or complete air. That ambiguity is enormously valuable in deep stack play. By the turn, they're still betting confidently. By the river, you've gotten 3 streets of full value from a hand they would have released immediately on the flop if you'd raised and shown strength. Deep stacks are where the biggest slow play payoffs live. Here's the practical nuance that separates good execution from great execution in deep stack MTT situations. The disguise value of a check call in deep stack spots doesn't just affect this specific hand. It affects how your opponent plays against you for the entire remaining tournament. When they see you check call a flop with what turned out to be the nuts, they're left with genuine uncertainty about every future check from you. Was that a weak hand or a trap? They don't know. And that uncertainty costs them EV on every hand going forward. Professional tournament players deliberately create these ambiguous lines early in deep stack situations specifically to generate future table dynamic value. The single check call on the flop that cost you nothing in immediate chips generates returns across dozens of future hands where your opponents second-guess their aggression against you. That's leverage you can only create in deep stack situations, which is exactly why these spots deserve special attention in your MTT strategy. Situation 4. When dangerous cards are coming and you need to lock the money in before they arrive. This situation operates on fundamentally different logic from the previous 3. And it's critical to understand why. The first 3 situations were about maximizing value over multiple streets through patience and letting the opponent drive. This one is specifically about getting the chips in before the board destroys your action or your equity. Here's the scenario. You're on the flop with a powerful made hand, a flopped straight, a flush, or a strong 2-pair, but a hand that becomes vulnerable the moment certain turn or river cards arrive. If the board pairs on the turn, your straight is now losing to a full house. If the river brings a 4th card to the flush suit, your flush might be dominated. These are hands where the standard multi-street slow play is genuinely dangerous. Not because you're not ahead right now, but because your lead can disappear with a single community card. GTO Wizards data highlights a specific and important play here. The check shove. Rather than leading into the pot and potentially chasing off weaker hands, you check, wait for the villain to bet, and then move all in over their bet. This works for 2 specific reasons. First, players who have already put chips in the pot face a much more difficult fold decision than players who haven't committed anything yet. The check call shove sequence keeps weaker hands in far more often than an immediate bet raise sequence. Second, and most critically, it happens right now, before the dangerous card materializes. You're not waiting to see the turn. You're using the current street to get all the chips in while your equity is at its highest and the board hasn't had a chance to counterfeit your hand. This is slow play as precision timing, not patience. Here's the important nuance about the check shove that most players who attempt this play get wrong. The check shove only works efficiently when your opponent's betting range in the current spot is wide enough to include hands they'll feel pot committed to calling with after they've already put chips in. If your opponent is only betting with strong-made hands that will snap call a shove regardless, the check shove doesn't generate extra value over a direct raise. The result is the same. The check shove generates its edge against players who bet a mix of made hands and draws, where the draws become reluctant but committed callers after having bet, whereas they would have folded cleanly to a direct raise. Identifying which opponent type you're facing, one who bets wide and feels committed, or one who bets tight and snaps, determines whether the check shove is the right execution of this situation or whether a direct raise generates equivalent or better value. Sure. Situation 5. Against aggressive chip leaders at the final table bubble. This is the most tournament-specific of all 5 situations, and the one that requires the deepest understanding of how ICM pressure and hand strength interact at exactly the moments that matter most for your overall tournament equity. At the final table bubble, the last few eliminations before the final table, where pay jumps become genuinely significant, the entire dynamic of the tournament changes in a predictable and exploitable way. Most players tighten dramatically to protect their stack. ICM pressure peaks, and into this environment, the large stack aggressor becomes almost untouchable. They're opening wide 3-betting light, firing continuation bets into scared fields, and taking down pot after pot. Here's where slow play becomes a tournament-changing weapon. When that aggressive chip leader raises and you 3-bet with premium hands, you immediately signal strength and they back off. They fold. They take their aggression somewhere else. You've won a small pot and gained nothing from your premium hand. But when you flat call the same premium hand, when you let them continue their aggressive line into you, something very different happens. They fire the flop because that's what they do. They fire the turn because they're committed. And by the river, you've built a massive pot against the most dangerous player at the table, extracted maximum value from the most aggressive range at the table, and transferred chips from the player with the most to lose to your stack at the exact moment when having a big stack going into the final table is worth an enormous amount of real money. The bubble slow play doesn't just win you the hand, it changes your tournament. Here's the detail about the final table bubble that most players underestimate when they think about slow playing in this spot. The chips you gain from this slow play are worth more than their face value. Going into the final table with a dominant stack doesn't just increase your chip count, it changes your strategic options for the entire final table. You can apply pressure to medium stacks. You can survive early confrontations that might bust shorter stacks. You can wait for premium spots. You can maneuver the ICM dynamics with authority rather than reacting to them. A stack built by extracting maximum value from the table's chip leader at the final table bubble is disproportionately valuable because of the position it creates. This is why professionals specifically look for spots to slow play premium hands against aggressive opponents at this tournament stage. They're not just trying to win the hand. They're engineering the stack composition they want entering the highest value stage of the tournament. Understanding this layer transforms the final table bubble slow play from a clever individual hand into a deliberate strategic construction. And now let's address the one mistake that turns all 5 of these profitable situations into expensive disasters. Because each of these slow play spots comes with a specific failure mode that costs tournament players significant chips every time it happens. The mistake is applying slow play logic to the wrong board texture. Slow playing works on dry boards, against polarized ranges, in specific stack depth situations, and when your hand is protected. It does not work when the board is coordinated and your opponent can pick up equity cheaply on the next card. Here's what this looks like in practice. You flop top set on JT9 with 2 hearts. You check to be tricky. Villain bets. You call to trap. Turn brings the 8 of hearts, completing both a straight and a flush for anyone who had those draws. Your set is still strong against some portions of their range. But you've handed them a free or cheap path to a hand that beats you, on a board that was screaming for immediate protection. This is where most players confuse strategic slow playing with undisciplined passivity. Slow playing is a calculated, mechanical choice to let the opponent drive the pot, because the SPR, the board texture, and the opponent's range mathematically reward patience. Being passive on a coordinated board because you want to be clever is simply giving away equity. The diagnostic question before every potential slow play: can my opponent pick up significant equity on the next card if I give it to them cheaply? If yes, fast play immediately. If no, if the board is dry, if the SPR rewards patience, if the opponent will keep firing regardless, then one of the 5 situations is present. That one question, asked consistently, will save you from the most expensive version of this mistake. Here's the additional nuance about misapplied slow play that costs the most chips and is hardest to diagnose after the fact. The worst version of this mistake isn't checking on a coordinated board and giving a free card. It's checking on a coordinated board, giving the free card, watching the dangerous draw complete, and then still calling the large river bet because you've been in the pot for 3 streets and feel pot committed. That sequence, passive flop, passive turn, expensive river call with a now second best hand, is the most expensive version of the wrong decision, and it's one that most players rationalize rather than recognize. The pattern looks like, I was trying to slow play, it just didn't work out. But in most cases, it wasn't a slow play that failed. It was a fast play situation that got misclassified as a slow play situation, compounded by pot commitment on the back end. The diagnostic question, can my opponent pick up significant equity on the next card, prevents the misclassification, and making a disciplined fold on the river when the dangerous card arrives prevents the compounding. Both require honesty about what the situation actually was. Let's bring all 5 situations together into a practical decision framework, because what matters most is not understanding these spots in theory. It's being able to identify them correctly in real time, under pressure, with chips on the line, and a decision clock running. Before checking with a monster in any potential slow play spot, you run through 3 questions in order. First, what is the SPR right now? Calculated or estimated? If the SPR is genuinely high, stacks are deep relative to the pot and multiple streets of natural pot building are available, patience is rewarded. Slow play logic applies. If the SPR is low, the money is going in regardless, and fast playing simply locks in the commitment. Question 2. Is the board dry or coordinated? Dry board with no meaningful draws means your opponent's range stays fixed from street to street. Their made hands stay made. Their confidence stays intact. They keep betting. Coordinated board with active draws means equity shifts dramatically on the next card. Protection matters more than deception, and fast playing is correct. Question 3. What does my specific opponent do when I show weakness? This is the most important of the 3. Slow playing only generates chips when the opponent fills the betting vacuum you've created. If your opponent is passive and tends to check back when checked too, slow playing accomplishes nothing. You've just given them free cards. Slow play is specifically designed for aggressive opponents who will fire. 3 questions. Run them in under 30 seconds. They will tell you clearly whether you're in one of the 5 situations or in a fast play spot. Apply this consistently, and your stack building efficiency in tournament poker changes permanently. Here's the depth level that separates intermediate players from advanced tournament players in applying this framework. Advanced players don't just run the 3 questions on hands where they flopped a monster. They run them preemptively, before the hand even starts, based on stack depths and table dynamics. When they sit down at a new table and see that effective stacks are 80 big blinds, they're already thinking, if I flop a big hand against the aggressive player in seat 4, I'm going to check call and extract 3 streets of value. That pre-game mental preparation means the decision is already made before the pressure of the hand arrives. They're not calculating in real time under stress. They're executing a plan they committed to before the hand began. This is what makes the framework so valuable, beyond just the mechanical questions. It becomes a decision architecture that operates faster than real-time calculation and more reliably under pressure. Build the habit of running the 3 questions at the start of each session based on current stack depths and table composition, and the execution during actual hands becomes dramatically more consistent. Here's what most tournament players miss when they start incorporating slow play correctly. And it's the same thing they miss when they make any significant strategic improvement to their game. The change doesn't just add chips in the specific hands where you execute it correctly. It changes the entire dynamic of how your opponents think about every hand they play against you for the rest of the tournament. When you're known as a player who occasionally slow plays monsters, every single check you make carries uncertainty. The aggressive player at your table who normally fires into passive-looking boards now has to ask, is this a weak hand or a trap? That moment of doubt has real value. It costs your opponent's decisional bandwidth. It creates hesitation where certainty used to exist. And players who are uncertain make specific, costly mistakes. They check back hands they should bet. They size down when they should size up. They fold marginal hands they'd normally call. They underbluff spots they'd normally fire. All because one well-executed slow play earlier in the session has planted a seed of doubt about your range every time you check. Professionals call this range disguise, and it's one of the most durable edges available in tournament poker. You don't need to slow play frequently to generate this effect. You need to slow play occasionally in exactly the right spots, with hands strong enough to win a large pot when the action finally comes. One slow play executed correctly and observed by the table is worth more than a dozen small pots won through aggression, because it compounds across every hand you play for the rest of that tournament. That compounding effect is what separates players who occasionally run deep from players who build the stacks that win events. Here's what makes this compounding effect particularly powerful in online MTTs specifically. In a 4-hour online MTT, you might play 300 to 400 hands. If you execute one or two slow plays correctly and get them observed by your table, the doubt you've planted in your opponent's reads of your checking range lasts for the entire tournament. Every check you make for the rest of the event carries that uncertainty. Against aggressive opponents who rely on range reading and aggression, that uncertainty directly reduces their EV in every contested pot. They bet smaller into your checks. They fire fewer continuation bets. They fold more to your eventual raises. All of this is downstream value from one or two correctly executed slow plays earlier in the tournament. In live poker, where tables break and reform and opponents have limited exposure to your play, this effect is somewhat reduced. But in online MTTs with extended run-deep scenarios and consistent table assignments, the image value of a correctly executed slow play compounds across hundreds of hands and represents one of the highest leverage plays in the entire format. Let's make everything we covered today concrete and immediately usable, because the goal was never just to explain 5 interesting tournament poker concepts. The goal was to give you a system you can apply tonight, in your next MTT, in real time, under pressure. 3 things to carry with you. First, memorize the 3-question framework and run it every time you consider slow playing. SPR, board texture, opponent tendency. In order, every time. High SPR, dry board, aggressive opponent. You're in a slow play spot. Any one of those answers reversed, you're in a fast play spot. This framework makes the decision binary and fast, which is exactly what you need when the clock is running and chips are on the line. Second, know which of the 5 situations you're actually in before you execute. Large bet size situation, check call and let them barrel. Dry board, multi-street extraction through patience, deep stacks. 3 streets of disguised value with full range ambiguity. Scary cards incoming, check shove before the action killer arrives. Final table bubble, flat call premium hands against the aggressive chip leader. Each situation has a specific execution. Knowing which one you're in changes how you run the line. Third, once you've identified the situation and started the slow play, commit to it completely. The most expensive version of this mistake is the player who checks the flop, calls the turn, panics on the river, and gets out of the way. You've already given them cheap cards. Backing out mid-slow play delivers the worst of both worlds. Trust the read, finish the line. If this opened a layer of your tournament strategy that wasn't fully developed before, the complete framework for how chips convert to real money in every stage of an MTT is in the Mind of a Grinder series. 10 books. Everything from technical decisions to psychological mastery. Link in the pinned comment. Tell me below, which of these 5 situations have you been playing wrong? From this point forward, you don't just play your hand, You play the situation, and if that question has an honest answer that reveals you've been misplaying one of these situations, good. That's the information that changes results. The players who run deep consistently aren't necessarily more talented than the players who exit early. They're the ones who identify specific, correctable mistakes and address them with a structured framework rather than general intentions. These 5 situations give you the framework. The 3 questions give you the execution. And every tournament you play from this point forward is practice for getting the timing right. That's how the skill builds. Not overnight, not in one tournament, but across sessions, across decisions, across the accumulated reps of running the framework until it becomes automatic. The chips follow the decisions follow the framework, and the framework is now in your hands.